Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so thrilled to have you. My name is Daphne Scholl. I am the creative producer for The Braid, as well as your Zoom master for today's event. If you are a returning patron, welcome back. If this is your first time, welcome to Sunday with The Braid. We're so happy to have you. Please let us know where you're tuning in from in the chat. As always, I have a few technical reminders before we begin. Your audio function is muted, and that is just to ensure we don't have any accidental interruptions between our moderator and our panelist. The closed captioning option is available. You can hit the CC button at the bottom, and that will have text pop up on your screen. You can enlarge it and move it around to your liking. If you have any questions for Faith, we will be having a Q&A at the end, so feel free to chat me your questions during the event, and I'll be compiling them and hopefully get to as many as I can at the end. We also will be having this recording posted on our website afterwards, so if you liked what you heard and you want to share it with friends or family or rewatch it yourself, you can find it on our website, on our YouTube page in probably about 2 or 3 days. So with that, I am done, and I'm going to now send it over to our moderator, Susan Morgenstern. Hello, Susan.
Hi, Daphne. Thanks so much. Here we go. Hi, thanks, Daphne, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm Susan Morgenstern, producing director of The Braid, and I'm delighted to be guest moderating today's Sunday with The Braid in conversation with journalist, actor, comedian, author, screenwriter, Rhodes Scholar, and full disclosure, my friend, Faith Salie. As you know, Daphne will field your questions afterwards, so feel free to put any questions you have in the chat. Faith's bio could fill an entire hour, but briefly, Faith has won 5 Emmys for her stories and commentaries on CBS Sunday Morning, covering wildly diverse topics. She has been a beloved panelist on NPR's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me for over a decade, and she's hosted a multitude of podcasts across many platforms. She is the author of Approval Junkie, my heartfelt and occasionally inappropriate quest to please just about everyone and ultimately myself. And her deeply and provocative pieces have been published in the New York Times, Time Magazine, McSweeney's, USA Today, Slate, the Oprah Magazine O, Glamour, Harper's Bazaar, and many more. When I asked Faith to describe herself, she wrote, quote, "I'm a storytelling feminist, a connector, striving to live a purposeful life with curiosity, gratitude, and humor, and committed to raising kids with open minds, open hearts, and jazz hands." But since we are a global theater organization here at The Braid, and I first met Faith as a terrific actress, we're going to begin with a very short trailer from her one-woman show based on her memoir, Approval Junkie.
Now that my high school is in the 21st century, I am pretty sure that they have shut down the beauty and talent pageant that we Spartans competed in every spring. And by competed, I mean fought to the death, because it's a kind of murder to put white girls on stage to sing Whitney Houston songs in their head voices. We'd been married 3 months when my husband asked if I would consider undergoing an exorcism. I think he registered how outrageous the question was, but committed to it because he really wanted to know. Here's the truly funny thing. The way I found my voice was by listening. I think really listening must be something like being a midwife, helping people deliver what they need to say into a world where their stories can wail and cry for attention, to be held, to be heard.
Faith Salie, welcome to Sundays with The Braid.
Susan, you've already got me off again.
Oh.
In my introduction, when you kindly, generously listed all those things, I have to tell you the thing that gets me right here is that I am your friend. So thank you for inviting me.
Oh, great. Well, you and I go back a ways together, and I was fortunate to direct you myself in a few plays and musicals. And I have to say, I always felt you kind of lit up the stage in everything you were in. And I really appreciated working with such a highly intelligent actress, in fact, a Rhodes Scholar. So, what drew you to the theater?
As a child, our parents always took us to the theater. I mean, in retrospect, it seems like they took us all the time. I grew up in suburban Atlanta. They probably took us to a few shows a year at the Alliance Theater, which is this wonderful repertory theater there. So there was always a big musical, and there was always Shakespeare. And I just remember sitting in the audience feeling like pulled from the heart, not just, oh my gosh, I love this, but I'm supposed to be up there. And I started performing. I think I was the loudest kid who enunciated the best in fourth grade. It wasn't even talent. It was like, volume. So I got to play the judge in the fourth grade play. And I was just hooked. And I think I also discovered sometime early in high school that being funny as a girl, it felt defiant. And I also felt like, and maybe it's less so now, there's countless amazing female comedians, but back then it felt like extra credit to be a silly girl who did physical comedy and would go to any length to make people laugh. And I never lost that. I still, when I take my own children to Broadway shows as much as possible, feel pulled to the stage.
Oh, that's so great. It's terrific. I relate to so much of that. Part of the Braid's mission in our theater and storytelling is to leave no Jewish story untold. And while you yourself are not Jewish, you have a very interesting and unique Jewish story. Can you tell us first how you were introduced to Judaism?
I love that you began mentioning the braid because it's such a rich metaphor. And by the way, I want everyone to know, speaking of Jewish stories and Jewish women, I put on my favorite Christmas sweater for today's conversation, which is, of course, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. In retrospect, my life is a little bit braided with Judaism because my mother, who intended to be a nun, and went to Notre Dame, all girls, all women Catholic college, not Notre Dame, Notre Dame in Maryland, I think. And then she met my dad, and her plans to become a nun got derailed. She loved Judaism. She always told me if I could be any other religion, it would be Jewish. And she loved the Old Testament. And she taught, so I was raised Catholic, obviously. She taught the Catholic equivalent of Sunday school is called CCD. And she always chose to teach sixth grade because in sixth grade CCD, you study the Old Testament all year. So, the Old Testament is, what does my husband call the New Testament? I think he calls it the Coda. The Old Testament is full of Jewish stories, right? And she used to bring home matzah during Passover, which of course was our Lent. I don't know how Jewish it was because we would put butter all over butter and salt all over the matzah. I don't know. Is that a very Goyish thing to do?
I know some people who do butter on matzah. Okay. And did she talk at all about what that holiday was about?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, she was all in for Moses and talking about, escaping. We learned about that in Sunday school, about escaping Egypt. And I often think she died 27 years ago. I think so often how much she would have loved that her son-in-law is Jewish and that her grandchildren, my children, are Jewish.
Right. Wow. We had a conversation after she died where I told you that she would continue to show up in your life. And now with the passage of time, do you think that her life and unfair early death influenced where you are now?
I will never forget that conversation. So I have known Susan, I did the math. I've known you for 28 and a half years.
Wow.
Yeah. And I met Susan in 1995 and my mother died in 1997. And I remember you telling me, I remember where we were standing. And I remember you're telling me that I would continue to know my mother and learn new things about her. And it wasn't that I didn't believe you. I was hungry for any wisdom and guidance and empathy at that time.
Yeah.
But the truth of your words took me until I became a mother myself, which wasn't until I was 41 and 43 is when I had my kids, that I started having new discoveries about how deeply she loved me. I always knew, I knew that I was absolutely cherished by her. But when I began to love my own children, when things that they would do that make me happy would make me cry, I finally clicked into, oh, like you mentioned the roads, right? I remember when I walked out of the law firm in downtown Atlanta after where I had learned that I had won the roads, because they bring all the candidates in and you spend a day interviewing and then they line you up. It's like a chorus line, Susan.
Right,
and
right.
these 4 people step forward. And I remember I walked out, my parents had come to pick me up and I walked out of the building and I smiled and I just went, and my mom, I could see she was like in a car and I just saw her dramatically burst into tears. And I remember at 22 thinking, why are you bursting into tears? Like, this is amazing news. Yeah. And now I do that because I am learning. Now, granted, I'm like in perimenopause and have a zillion questions to ask her, but I cannot. So I have to turn to other women in my life.
Right.
But it is in answer to your question, it is also very a new time in my life where I'm about to be the age she was when she died. And that is an interesting transition to realize now I get years that she never had. And will I continue to learn about her?
Yeah, I bet you will. I bet you will. So I'm going to fast forward.
Sorry, I just want to give you credit. I quoted you once in a CBS Sunday Morning commentary I did about Mother's Day. And I said, a wise friend of mine once told me I would continue to understand my mother. So thank you for that.
Well, that's great. Well, this is not about me. So fast forward, you met and married John, and you made quite an interesting agreement together. Can you tell us about that and why you're both committed to raising Jewish children?
Yeah, we had both been married before. We met when we were 39. We were married at 40. I was already pregnant with our son. That's my son with the baseball cap on and the long hair. And he is Jewish. He's John with an H. There's only a few Jewish Johns with an H in the world. And I knew how important his Judaism was to him. And it was far more important than my being raised Catholic is to me. I am grateful I was raised Catholic. I feel a sense of home when I step into a church often. It's also conflated with my mother because she was my Catholic role model and she was so open-hearted. However, I have so many problems with the dogma of my faith religion that it was not hard for me when John asked about 4 months into our dating. I mean, we were fast tracking everything. He said, would you consider raising kids Jewish? And I barely had to pause. I said, yeah, absolutely. And he said, would you consider converting? And I paused a little longer. And in that very short, truly, it was a short pause before I answered. But so I was raised in Georgia, surrounded by lots and lots of Protestant Christians, right? A lot of Southern Baptists. And there is a lot of talk in evangelical communities about my relationship with Jesus. People talk about their relationships with Jesus. And this had never been sort of part of my parlance as a Catholic person. But I had this fleeting thought. I was like, I think I have a relationship with Jesus. And I don't know what the status is, but I'm not ready to give up whatever my relationship with Jesus is. So I it would not be appropriate for me to consider converting to Judaism, because whatever vestiges of my early religion are still in me, would make it seem like, for me, if I converted, it would be a kind of appropriation. And yet, so I said no, I would not want to convert, but I would be honored to raise kids Jewish, and we'll need to figure out what that looks like. And then I said, because I couldn't give it all away. I mean, I was raised much more religiously than my husband, and we're in New York City, and my family is a bunch of Red Sox fans. So I said, okay, we can raise kids Jewish if we raise them as Red Sox fans. I was like, how does that work for you? And he paused much longer than I paused to consider my relationship with Jesus. And he was like, okay, I guess. But I mean, they're going to come to an age where they're going to have to decide for themselves. So I will cut to the fact that my kids like the Yankees. They love the Yankees and they like the Red Sox. So, it's a mixed marriage. What can you do? We make it work.
Exactly, a mixed marriage. I understand that you recently spoke in a synagogue on this topic about raising Jewish children. And I think at one point, I'm not sure if this is still happening, but I know that Tablet, which is the Jewish online magazine, was working with you about doing a podcast on that very subject. So on that note, I would imagine that you have concerns that your kids will face challenges, as there are people in the world, to me, that they are ignorant people, but there are people in the world who will say, oh, your mom's not Jewish, so you're not really Jewish. Yeah. And how do you prepare them for that? How do you navigate that?
It's such a good question. And, in this time that we're talking, with the horrors of October 7th and the horrors of anti-Semitism, it seems like that very valid question has receded. My kids know that they will continue to have people say to them, you're not really Jewish. And it just doesn't register with them. In fact, last year, when my daughter was in 3rd grade, one of her Jewish classmates informed her that she wasn't really Jewish. And she came home and I was like, well, my daughter's Minerva. You can see we were in Piazza Minerva in that picture. Right. I said, Minerva, do you think you're Jewish? She said, of course I'm Jewish. And I said, and so you are. There's that, I forget what holiday it is, and I don't know if this happens in all cities, but in New York, we're all pedestrians, and there are they called the mitzvah vans?
Right.
When they're walking around, what's it called? The lulav? The thing you shake?
Yeah. What's it called? I think it's the lulav. You're putting me on the spot, but yeah.
Okay, so
those are sort of
so there are always, we live on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. There are always young Jewish men on the street walking around at that time of year saying, are you Jewish? And if you stop and say yes, they invite you to shake what you and I think is called the lulav. I'm sure a million people in
the chat is heating up, but it's doing Sukkot, and a friend of mine said it is the lulav. Yes.
I have to tell you, I love when I get these things right. Like today, I used the word cavelling, and I was checking with a Jewish friend. I was like, did I use that right? He's like, yes. So I've been this past fall, I was walking with my son, and they came up to us and they said, are you Jewish? And I said, I'm not, but my son is. And I could just see the smoke coming out of the guy's ears as he was trying to figure that out. Right. Because there are lots of people. I mean, I know that, many people think that Judaism is matrilineal. And for us, it's not. My husband tells a story of being in San Francisco years ago, and there was a debate as to who gets to be called Jewish. And he said there was a man, a very old man there, who, for whatever reason, wasn't considered Jewish enough by the speakers. And this man went up to the podium and he pushed up his shirt, and he had a tattoo from a concentration camp. And he said, who will tell me I'm not Jewish? Now, my kids, thank God, have nothing like that, but they identify as Jewish. So
I know something happened this morning that you were telling me about that you might want to.
This is, First of all, I'm glad we're all here right now, and I'm grateful for everyone who's shown up, because it feels healing just to be in communion, just to be in conversation. And, just this morning, so much happened at once. That kind of makes it feel urgent. I came out of my apartment, headed over to Riverside Park for a run, and all over the Upper West Side, there are pictures of kidnapped Israelis that have been taped to boxes and signs, and people are ripping them down. And there are, I haven't seen people ripping them down, but it's all over social media. And there was, I noticed a sign on the ground, and it was ripped in half and it was on the ground, and I picked it up, and there was still enough viscosity to the tape to put it back up. And I put it up, and then I slammed it so that it would stay up, and I went for a run. And when I came back, we went to our favorite diner across the street for breakfast. And I had a magazine, an actual 20th century kind of magazine paper. And my son was looking at it, and it was talking about the rise in anti-Semitism. And he was reading it very quietly. He's 11. And he started crying. And this is not news to him. He in fact, his 6th grade teacher was asked to step away from school a couple weeks ago because he showed the 6th grade boys a pro-Palestine video without any context or any conversation.
Wow.
Yeah. So it is not news to him that anti-Semitism is on the rise. It is not news to my children that posters are being ripped down. They see it. But he was hit really hard with this feeling of, with a kind of realization, he said, of how many people hate us, and for how long have they hated us, and why do they hate us so much? And I gave him a hug, and I had my arm around him, but I really wanted to hear what my husband said. And my husband held him close. We came home, and he, my husband talks to my kids a lot about the fact that they are part of such a hyper minority, such a people who have persevered and have done, are so overrepresented in all these beautiful ways in science and arts, and helping others and being allies to other people who have been persecuted, and trying to give my kids this sense of history that for all of the thousands of years that Jews have been alienated, ostracized, pushed out, they have survived and they have thrived. And then my son said, but I feel like I can't do anything about it. And we talked about that beautiful phrase that I only learned a couple of years ago, tikkun olam. And my husband talked about, living in New York City, you are surrounded by people every day. They're right here, literally. And my husband talked about how we can all just do our acts of connection and kindness every day, as many as we can. And we have to believe that that's healing the world. So, I am going to drop a name here because I feel like you'll very much appreciate it. We learned the phrase tikkun olam from our dear family friend, Mandy Patinkin. Mandy and Catherine, we are blessed that they are our friends. And we were once visiting them, and Catherine and I took a walk in the woods, and John sat with Mandy by their pool and talked to Mandy about John's relationship with Judaism. And Mandy said to him, so this is all credit to his wisdom, that he doesn't have to figure out how to raise his kids, John's kids, whether his kids are going to be bar, bat, mitzvah. All any of us can do as Jews, he said to John, is every day make as many choices that honor tikkun olam.
Right.
So that's what we're trying to do.
That's beautiful. That's really, really beautiful. And an important topic for today. So I appreciate your sharing that. I love that then after this meaningful conversation at the diner, I believe you went to the Radio City Christmas Spectacular.
And to see the Rockettes and to see Santa and to see at the end. Have you ever been, Susan?
Yes, a long time ago.
At the end, there's this amazing, there's the nativity, and they walk camels across the stage.
Yeah.
And I get chills, and I miss my mom, and they play Hark the Herald Angels Sing, and I feel overwhelmed with when I was a child, what I truly felt was the magic and miracle of Christmas. Yeah. And I squeezed my husband's hand because I'm so grateful to be married to someone who is Jewish, wants to raise Jewish kids, and also embraces all the beauty and fun of my traditions, because that doesn't always happen. And
Right.
that's what our family's about. It's about all of it at once. It's about a Christmas sweater with RBG.
I love that. And I also love that you're sitting surrounded by the artwork clearly from these beautiful children who have beautiful names. It's Minerva and Augustus. Is that right?
That's right. Augustus was made in Rome, which I used to say casually, but now that he's hit puberty, he's always like, that's disgusting.
Right. All right. So let us get into your illustrious career. I think we should pivot to that now. So I want you to tell us about how you went from theater to becoming a journalist and then becoming part of CBS Sunday Morning.
When you knew me, first, I was an actor. I did musical theater throughout high school. I did musical theater in college, which was delightful. And I came to LA, but I went to grad school in England and got a master's in literature. Did musical theater there as well. If people know the Sondheim musical Assassins, I had the pleasure of being the only American in Assassins. John Wilkes Booth had an English accent. It was great. And moved to LA. For some reason, thought that I needed to be a sitcom star, which would have been nice, by the way. I had some success, or certainly had the success of meeting you in the theater community. I got beamed up on Star Trek, which I plan to dine out on for the rest of my life. I keep telling my kids someday they'll realize how cool that is. And then I did, as happens with many actors, you feel it's so hard. It's so frustrating. It's such a crapshoot. And so I started trying to figure out how I could script myself. And I started doing stand-up comedy. The best I ever was so-so. But by the way, my son right now, the 11-and-a-half-year-old, is doing a stand-up comedy show downtown in Chelsea at Gotham Comedy. So hopefully he will have a better stand-up career than I. But basically what I was doing was scripting myself. Like, if you're not going to cast me, then I'll write my own stuff. And and that was when reality TV with those talking head shows started. So I was always on this show called Best Week Ever. I was writing my own jokes and it felt good. And then I got cast in a sitcom on Bravo called Significant Others. It ran for 2 seasons. It was like Curb Your Enthusiasm. Again, it was all improvised. So I was scripting myself. And while all that was happening, an old college friend in New York was casting a national public radio show that they wanted to be like The Daily Show, Monday through Friday at night, a comedy show about the week's news. And she called me and said, I know you're living in LA. I know you do comedy. Do you know anybody in New York who we could bring in to audition for the host? And so I kind of Dick Cheney'd myself into the process and said, I know someone who'd like to audition. And so I did. And I ended up getting to host this national public radio show. It was called Fair Game. It was one of the first podcasts ever. And it was on, so I moved to New York to do that. And I had no experience interviewing people. I had some experience, doing comedy, but what it did was it was truly my lucky break, like that fork in the road. Because what it did was scratch all these itches I hadn't even realized I had, which was to use my nerd brain, part of my nerd brain, the part of me that loves preparing, the part of me that read every single book. If I was going to interview someone who wrote a book, I didn't skim it. I read the whole thing on the subway. I had a lot to learn about interviewing, but it turned out I loved it. And my natural want to ask people questions, which I've always done, probably to a rude extent. It solidified that. It made it legitimate. I could ask people whatever I wanted to ask them.
Yeah, we're looking at a beautiful picture of you on set at CBS Sunday Morning doing that great story about Seneca Village, for example.
Yeah,
but it's a far cry to do what you're doing and get called into CBS Sunday Morning.
So if folks know, so it all goes back to musical theater, Susan, because the reason I'm on CBS Sunday Morning is because I went to college with Mo Rocca, who folks might know from CBS Sunday Morning, and wait, don't tell me. And Mo very generously said, you know what, we need more women commentators. And so he introduced me to the executive producer, and that was 15 years ago.
Wow.
So that's how it started. I was doing commentary on Sunday Morning.
Amazing. So you have done hundreds, I think, of CBS Sunday morning shows over the years. I mean, I've looked at a bunch, but do you have any favorites? Are they the
that picture is me? That's Padma Lakshmi, and I made my mother's famous Coca-Cola bundt cake and gave it to her at the end of the interview because, of course, she's a judge on what's the food?
Top Chef.
Thank you. And so I sat there. That's me waiting for her to judge the taste of the Coca-Cola cake.
I know. I liked her commentary too. I've looked at that interview. I love that. I've always loved that story, and I'm a big fan of hers. And this is you with an artist,
Romero Brito, who is kind of the artist of Miami. And he's from Brazil and gives back. I mean, this is the joy of doing. So I mentioned when I go see a Broadway show, I still feel pulled to the stage. I still intend to be on Broadway someday. I got to off Broadway. I still intend to be on Broadway. But there and so that has always been a lifelong dream. But then there are times I realize if I had been a Broadway performer, if I had been a star of a sitcom back in the late 90s when I wanted to, what I never would have gotten to do is all these incredible stories on CBS Sunday Morning that shine the light on other people. It is so gratifying I feel like every story I do, I joke that I get a mini PhD because, I'm going to do a story on, I'm doing a story on the history of the huddle right now that will air on Super Bowl Sunday. And it happens to be fascinating. It started at Gallaudet University because a bunch of deaf players didn't want everyone to see the signs they were making. But this is in the 19th century, so they huddled up But every single story I do, every single person I get to meet is such a gift. And had I achieved the dreams that I thought I had when I was 25, 30, I wouldn't get to do the things I do now and meet the amazing people I get to meet.
So I asked you if you have any favorites, because there's so many of them, and if there are any good celebrity, we always like the celebrity story. Doesn't everybody love it? You drop Mandy Patinkin's name because he's a personal friend, but do you have any celebrity stories from CBS Sunday Morning? We always like those insider behind the scenes.
Okay, I'm gonna have to think about that for a second, but I do want to point out, maybe people who are watching know this. That's obviously Hamantaschen, right? That's at Brett's Bakery in New York. We did not put this on CBS Sunday Morning, but when we were talking to historians about what the Hamantaschen cookie, the shape, could symbolize, one of the things was Esther's vagina. Did you know that? Anybody know that?
No.
There you go. There's your nugget. There's when you need to know what gets on the cutting room floor of CBS Sunday Morning, it's Esther's vagina. So at your next Purim celebration, you can throw that little nugget out there.
Yeah.
I mean, I am not often on given the celebrity stories for CBS Sunday Morning, which is fine with me. Those often go to Jane or Gayle King or Tracy Smith. Because what's interesting is with celebrity stories, as I bet you could imagine, you are very constricted what you are allowed to talk about. And there's always a whole team. People have people, and you don't often get to those vulnerable moments. But I did have the pleasure of Padma Lakshmi. She went there. She's got quite an interesting story, or many interesting stories.
And I saw a picture of you with Linda Carter, who was Wonder Woman.
Yeah, this is my Wonder Woman Tumblr, by the way. Yes. I mean, honestly, Susan, now that we could probably list 15 more super famous. William Shatner, I've interviewed. I've interviewed a lot of famous people, but 15 years of it blurs. Linda Carter is just an astonishing force of nature, and she looks about 15 years younger than I am, and she's in her 70s. People are, or I had a story air today about Slutty Vegan, and the woman who runs that is a celebrity in her own right. Her name is Pinky Cole. So Andrew Rannells, the Broadway performer, and
Right.
Jerry, you know, I did not interview him for CBS Sunday Morning, but I interviewed him for a podcast I did on Audible. Jerry Zaks, the incredible Broadway producer, who has also become a dear family friend, because when you connect with people, I mean, John and I have a joke that like all our best friends are now amazing Jewish artists in their 70s. Like those are our people. And so it is a real gift to be able to connect with people through this job.
Yep. I see it. Yeah, I saw that story this morning. I got up early to make sure I watched it. Everybody, you can get that, I'm sure, online, or if you've recorded it, it's a great story. I am a devoted listener of the NPR News quiz show, Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. I remember the first time I tried it out, about the second or third time I listened to it, your name came up and I was like, my jaw dropped. I couldn't, So you have not only become a regular panelist, but truly one of its stars. You've even guest hosted. There you are, guest hosting for Peter one day. You clearly have lots of fun, but you're also extremely competitive. I want to know what you love about this. And of course, we want some behind the scenes stories. This, in fact, you'll have to tell me who these other panelists are, but this photo is at Carnegie Hall, where they recorded a Wait, Wait not so long ago.
That's Peter Gross and Negin Farsad. And I tell everybody, if you've ever come to a live taping of Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, for 15 years, I buy probably 10 of these legal pads a year. I use every page. I told you I was a nerd. I take notes all the time. And I am the only panelist who comes out on stage with pages of notes. They're all headlines that I jot down from that week's news. That's all they are. They're just headlines. But this is an improvised comedy show, and I'm the person who comes out with pages of notes. That is something that calms me down, because I don't really get to pay a lot of attention to the news every week because I have 5 jobs and 2 kids. So on the day of the show, I just beaver away on the airplane in the airport lounge, because we fly to go do the show. It's either in Chicago or it's at Carnegie Hall. I'm about to do a show. I'm about to do the Wait, Wait stand-up tour in Burlington, Vermont and Rochester, New York. And so, yes, I am very competitive, and it is pathetic how much I care about winning, because you don't get anything.
Right. I know. I love that. You and Roxanne Roberts, I think, are very, very competitive.
I think she is the winningest contestant. Yes. I think she is the valedictorian and I'm the salutatorian.
I'll tell you, I not so long ago, maybe 6-8 weeks ago, I was listening, and I want you to tell this story because I actually had a little shiver go up my spine. Hillary Rodham Clinton was the guest person, the big guest. And, there's always the short interview and then the little game that's played with that guest. And I actually heard these words over my radio. Excuse me, Secretary Clinton, this is Faith Salie. Do you mind if I share a little story about your husband? So would you please?
Yes. And in fact, I'm trying to find the picture that goes along with it. My daughter used to go to, here it is. Okay. So my daughter went to a school. She's changed schools last year. She went to school. There's a grandparents' day at this school. And in the grade below her is Chelsea Clinton's daughter. This is New York, right? So you see Steve Martin at drop-off. I mean, that's what happens, right? So everyone, this is New York City. So all the grandparents are like too cool for school. They're not going to like acknowledge that a president and a, former Secretary of State are right there while the teacher reads picture books. Except for my mother-in-law, who went up to President Clinton. I don't know. Hold on. I don't know if you can see this. And really, really got a very good selfie with him. I'm sorry, I lost it on the screen. So it's a selfie of my mother-in-law and President Clinton. And I showed it to Minerva, and she said, "Who's that man with grandma?" And I said, oh, well, that's President Clinton. She goes, you mean Hillary's husband? And it was perfect. It was a perfect rejoinder. I had the honor of introducing President Clinton. We both spoke at Oxford in June, and he was the keynote speaker. I gave a little speech, and then I got to introduce him. And I wanted to tell that story, but I was also like, oh God, what if he doesn't laugh? So I decided not to tell it before his speech. His speech was wonderful. Then he went and sat down, and I felt emboldened. I was like, what the hell? And I told that speech to an audience of 2,000 Rhodes Scholars, including Bill Clinton. And he actually slapped his knee. Like, he was a very good sport. He loved it. So
I love that. Yeah, Hillary liked it too. Just to wrap up on Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. I love this. Daphna has a picture she's about to spotlight that's of you guys on stage at Carnegie Hall. The thing that blew my mind, that's, I guess, you and Peter and Nagin. I'm not sure.
No, that's actually a different Carnegie Hall show. That's Peter and I and Paula Poundstone.
And Paula Poundstone. But what killed me is it never occurred to me, since I hear it on the radio, that you guys sit shoulder to shoulder like that. Here you are on this huge stage. I assumed you'd be spread apart, but you are actually shoulder to shoulder. I just thought that was so interesting.
Yes, and we scribble little notes to each other and stuff.
And pass them back.
High five each other during the show. Yep.
Right. I'm going to quickly, I wanted to talk about your memoir, Approval Junkie, which I so enjoyed reading. I'm sure, like a lot of people, the title spoke to me. And of course, it was developed into that tremendous one-woman show that we saw the trailer of, that your kids got to see. So now you were back on a stage. Was that thrilling, terrifying, both? I love this picture. It's from the curtain call with, Minerva and Augustus.
It would, that picture might just be like that's just bucket list. That moment was just one. I don't want to say it's the highlight of my life, because we always want more highlights, but talk about everything coming together. The Alliance Theater, where I went as a child with my family, the executive director called me a few months after my book came out and said, I hadn't met her before. She had read my book. And she said, this is crazy, but would you consider adapting your book into a one-woman show for our 50th anniversary? And the day she called me was on what would have been my mother's 72nd birthday. Huh. And I said, well, I don't know if you know this, Susan, but Susan Booth, who was the executive director then, this is crazy. I grew up going to the Alliance Theater. It was my Broadway. It is the reason I became an actor. And so she's my fairy godmother. I collaborated with a person who is now my best friend, Amanda Watkins, to turn this book into a show. Along the way, I had like a workshop-y kind of go at it by taking one of the chapters of the book and turning it into a story for The Moth. Some folks here might know The Moth, the storytelling podcast. The story of what I wore to my divorce, because I was married. You have to marry a Jewish guy. It took me 2 marriages to learn that. I was married before I married John. And yes, and then this show, I premiered it at the Alliance in 2019. In March of 2020, it was set to open off Broadway at Monetta Lane in the Village. Right. It was shut down. And God bless the folks at Audible Theater. They brought it back 2 years ago this month in 2021.
Fantastic.
And as you know, there's a whole part in there about JSAP, which is what a friend of mine called my courtship of John, which stands for the Jewish Semen Acquisition Project. And given my age, when I was dating him and trying to get pregnant, my friend used to yell JSAP ASAP, and it all worked out.
It certainly did. So before I turn you over to Daphna, who's going to answer the audience questions, and I saw some great ones coming through the chat, so Daphna will field those and ask you a few more questions. But before that, I just want to let our audience know kind of the range of what you're working on now. So this morning, a story aired on CBS Sunday called Slutty Vegan, which is really worth a look. And sure enough, she's still got stories in the hopper. I can't wait to see this story about the history of the huddle, where I just learned an interesting fact that's coming up on Super Bowl Sunday. Faith is ongoing with Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. And now she is also doing the Wait, Wait stand-up tour. Oh, I wish I was on the East Coast, because on December 1st and 2nd, it will be in Burlington and Rochester, for those of you who are on the East Coast there. And she hosts 2 podcasts, including Real Good, which just won a big Signal Award, and Health Matters, which is about health and wellness. And I think there's a new podcast in the works on Audible about envy. She's got her next moth story, as she mentioned, that's in the works, another moth story. And by the way, Faith has a couple of plays she wants to write if she can find the time. So this makes me breathless. I cannot believe you found time for us. Thank you so much. I want to also thank Daphne. Stay tuned, because Daphne's going to take your questions. I want to thank Daphne for all that behind the scenes help with the photos, and to our regular moderators, Arlene Sarner and Lisa Rosenbaum, who helped me navigate my first time guest moderating. Little did I know how easy it would be, because I have my friend Faith here. She has a terrific website where you can try to keep up with her. We will post a link to the chat in a minute. And I also strongly encourage everyone to enjoy Facebook Approval Junkie. And there will be a link for that also that I'm going to post in the chat. And now here is Daphne to take the audience questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. An excellent job to Susan as well. Thank you for being our moderator today. It was really such a special gift to watch you moderate an event. So excellent job. So Faith, yes, we had a few questions. The first question that I have is from Arlene, who'd like to know who you'd love to interview that you have not been able to interview yet.
Oh, gosh. My first thought, I was about to say Hillary Clinton, because she was on Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, but of course Peter leads the way. But the thing about really famous, eloquent folks is, like, I just had an evening with George Stephanopoulos. It was like Faith Salie turns the tables on George Stephanopoulos, and I got to interview him. The thing with really, really experienced, eloquent folks like Hillary Clinton is that you rarely get to those moments of surprise and vulnerability. So what I just gave you was a non-answer. I'm going to have to think about it and shout it out before thank you for that question. Now I really want to think about that, and I'll have to shout it out before this. Dolly Parton.
I knew we'd get there.
By the way, of course she's eloquent and wise and experienced, but just to be in the same room as Dolly Parton. There you go. Dolly Parton.
I think that's a brilliant answer. I would love to watch that.
For president. Dolly Parton for everything. Yes.
I know. Bess would like to know if there's anyone noteworthy that left a deep impression on you, or said something that maybe changed your perspective or changed your life in some way.
I hope this isn't a cop-out answer, but my husband is so wise. And, one of the challenges of being a woman in the media is it's the haters, right? I guess it's the challenges of being anyone who's on social media today. And I quote him in my show. He says, the loudest boos come from the cheapest seats. Mm-hmm. And I think about that a lot. He also says, I also quote this in my show, act British, think Yiddish. Or in our family, we just say ABTY, which is really like, remember what you want to get out of a situation, smile, take the high road, and remember what's important. And so I always kind of think that I come home to him. He has so much wisdom.
Wow, I think you need to write a book of acronyms at this point. I think it would be very successful.
He has to publish Act British, Think Yiddish. It's very helpful.
But I think that's brilliant. Thank you for that. And the next question I have is so Susan let me know that you interviewed an 104-year-old woman named Ruth Rossner. who was a champion in the voting, and you brought your kids to the polls. And I wondered what that was like and why you thought it was important to include them.
Ruth Rosner died a couple weeks shy of 106. She had become, I had given her this cup. And when she died, and everyone, it was the only thing I asked to have back, because this Ruth and I shared this. She was so meaningful to my whole family. When you live in New York City the way we do, we don't have a country house. We don't go somewhere else in the weekends. We would all meet at Bread's Bakery, which is owned by our Israeli friend Gadi. He was the one in the picture with the Hamantashen that I did for Sunday Morning. And it's literally on Sesame Street. Bread's Bakery is on Broadway and Sesame Street. Sesame Street Way is another name for West 63rd. Ruth Rosner was the maven there. She would sit at a table. We knew her for 5 years. So we met her when she was a spring chicken. She was only 99. She'd sit at a table there, and there were about 12 of us who would go every Saturday and sit with Ruth. And she was a salty broad. And she called my husband, John, her boyfriend. And she would sing the Marseillaise in French and sing other socialist songs. And she had voted for every Democratic president since her first vote, which was for FDR. And she became sober when she was a kid at 72. And she ran her AA group on Zoom at 103 during the pandemic and called it All My Children. And so the day that early voting started on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, she said, we were sitting there on Broadway and the lines were down the block everywhere in New York. And she said, God, I can't wait. Can I curse, by the way, Daphna?
Briefly.
I'm quoting Ruth. I can't wait to fucking vote. And I was like, Ruth, you shouldn't have to wait. You're 104. My husband said, we will walk you over there to vote. You don't have to stand in line. She gets up on her walker. She goes, my kids were running to keep up with her. She zips across Broadway, and we all said, like, 104-year-old coming through, and the crowds parted. She goes in to vote. She takes out her ID, which shows that she was born in 1916. The pollster person started crying. I walk her to the booth and I'm ready to help her. And I'm like, wait a minute, she's been doing this since FDR. I don't think she needs my help. So my daughter, Minerva, held her hand. She voted. She came out. She walks out and hundreds of people up and down Broadway start applauding her. And Ruth just she turned to walk around, sat down on it, put her hands in her head and just started crying, because she said, I think this is why I lived this long. I wanted to cast that vote. And I posted about it, hashtag Ruth to the booth. It went viral. Hillary Clinton reposted it, Mandy Patinkin, George Takei, and so we did a CBS Sunday Morning story. And Gotti, the owner of Bread's Bakery, made babka that spelled out vote.
Wow. That's an incredible story.
That's why Ruth was Wonder Woman. Yeah. God bless her.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing. I love that your kids are always there. They're just always there doing the most amazing things, holding everyone's hand.
Thank you. And I just want to say that Ruth used to point to her boyfriend, my husband. She'd point to me and she'd go, the shiksa. He'd say, I know, Ruth.
I know. Well, speaking of your kids, how do they sort of navigate your fame and your people knowing you out in public? What is that like for them?
They're so proud. That's such a kind question. Thank you. They're very proud. And I really make it clear to them that the cool part of what I do isn't that sometimes people know me. It's that I get to tell these amazing stories. I get to be connected with these wonderful people and the shows that I'm on, they're iconic. Like CBS Sunday Morning wins Emmys not like I'm a cog in the wheel, and I feel like just grateful to be a part of it, right? Wait, don't tell me, when we go somewhere and travel, it's like we're the Beatles, but you know, I am fungible. There are lots of amazing panelists. I get to be a part of these incredible things. And so I always want them to know, for example, Jerry Zaks, right? He's now our dear family friend. And I got to meet him because I was interviewing him, because I got to shine a light on somebody else. I got to be curious. I got to amplify a story. So when we went to see The Music Man on Broadway and the director came up and gave my kids a hug, that's not so much about me, but it's about what I get to do. So that's the message I want them to get, is that when you choose something that's purposeful and fulfilling and hopefully in its own way makes the world a better place, that's what people want to thank me for. It's not like, oh, people know who my mom is. It's that I'm part of something, maybe a little bit, I don't want to sound vainglorious, but maybe a little tikkun olam, right?
That's what I was gonna say. You took my last line. But it's
By
true.
the way,
It's true.
I want to give a shout out to Ethel. That's Daphna's mom. And I saw her chime in. She said, proud mom of Daphna. So way to go, Ethel.
Yeah,
Good job.
Ethel!
You made a good person.
She did. She's a wonderful woman, and I love her. And thank you so much, Faith, for being here and for joining us. This has been such a treat. Really appreciate it.
I'm so honored. The braid is so meaningful, and I just love the idea of it. Thank you so much. Thank you for weaving me in, and thank you everybody who showed up. I really do believe right now we need communion, and conversation is communion. So thank you.
Thank you. And again, thank you to Susan for moderating. She did a lovely job. We'll have to have you back, Susan. And I just want, before you leave, I just have a few small things to let you know about that's going on with the braid. So our subscriptions are up. We have 3 amazing shows this year. You can go to our website and subscribe to the braid. You will be guaranteed seats or Zooms for 3 shows, and you also will get a small kind of discount in comparison if you buy individual tickets for each show. So be sure to subscribe. We also have our first show of the season. Those single tickets are up for I Loved Jew, I Loved Jew Not, and that's a show, a very timely show about anti-Semitism and about our allies who support us and our community. So it's both a show about troubling times, but also uplifting stories and moments of hope and love and community. So we hope you join us for that as well. And with that, I believe that we're gonna say goodbye. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much. Goodbye, everybody.